Have you ever wondered what size void a child can carry in their heart? There exists a loneliness that is born not just from the absence of people, but from the absence of someone who calls you son with true pride. This is the story of a boy who transformed his deepest pain into the most courageous question a child can ask. It was Saturday afternoon in Oakland, and the Rodriguez family's apartment was filled with the typical excitement of a Warriors game day. The aroma of freshly delivered pizza mixed with the anticipation in the air, while the television broadcast the pre-game commentary that made David Rodriguez vibrate with emotion in his favorite armchair. Ethan Williams, 9 years old, was sitting on the living room floor, meticulously organizing his basketball card collection. Each movement of his small hands carried an almost obsessive precision, especially when he touched Steph Curry's golden card, his most precious possession in the entire world. It was possible to perceive that this wasn't just a child's common admiration for an athlete. There was something deeper in the way Ethan looked at that card, as if he were holding a piece of materialized hope. "Ethan, come here, son," said David Rodriguez, a man with a generous heart who had opened his house to children in temporary adoption situations for the past 5 years. "The game will start in 15 minutes. The word son echoed in the air in a way that made Ethan quickly lift his head. For 3 years since he had entered the adoption system after losing his parents in a car accident, he had heard that word from various temporary families, but never with the permanence that his heart desperately sought. "Do you think Steph Curry will play well today?" Ethan asked, his voice carrying that mixture of anxiety and hope that only children can express with such purity. Sarah Mitchell, David's wife, and a woman whose infinite patience had helped dozens of children over the years, smiled from the couch where she was folding clothes. "I'm sure he will, dear. He always plays well when he has special people watching." "Special people like me?" Ethan asked, his brown eyes shining with a hope that broke hearts. How is it possible that a 9-year-old child carries so much unrequited love inside their chest? Ethan had created an elaborate fantasy where Steph Curry wasn't just his favorite player, but the father figure he had never truly known. In his drawings at school, Ethan always drew the same scene, he and Steph playing basketball together in the backyard of a house with a white fence, where Steph taught him how to make three-point shots while calling him "my son." It was a simple dream, but one that carried all the weight of the most basic human need: to belong to someone. "True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts," Sarah used to say to David when they talked about the children who passed through their house. And Ethan's heart was full of dreams precisely because there was so much empty space waiting to be filled. During the game, Ethan didn't watch like a normal child. He studied every movement of Steph with the intensity of someone trying to memorize the manual of how to be a perfect father. When Steph made a basket, Ethan shouted, "That's it, Dad," without even noticing the words that came out of his mouth. David and Sarah exchanged meaningful looks. They knew that Ethan wasn't just watching basketball, he was feeding a fantasy that protected him from the painful reality of being a child that no one had chosen to stay forever. "Ethan," David said during the game's halftime, "would you like to go watch a live game someday?" Ethan's eyes widened, as if David had just offered him the moon. "Are you serious? A real game? In the arena?" "Of course. We can try to get tickets for the next home game." What no one in the room knew was that this casual offer would plant the seed of a moment that would change not only Ethan's life, but touch millions of hearts around the world. That night, after David and Sarah went to sleep, Ethan remained awake in his temporary bed, holding Steph Curry's card against his chest. It was impossible not to feel that a 9-year-old child shouldn't have to carry so much emotional weight, so much hope placed in a famous stranger. "Please, God," Ethan whispered in the dark, "if I can meet Steph Curry in person, I'll ask if he can be my father. I promise I'll be the best son in the world." The innocence of that prayer contained so much unrequited love and such desperate courage that it seemed impossible that the universe wouldn't conspire to make it reality. 2 weeks later, David got 3 tickets for the Warriors vs. Lakers game. When he told Ethan, the boy didn't just smile, he cried. He cried tears of such pure joy that it made David question why such a special child still hadn't found a permanent family. True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts, and Ethan's heart was about to give life to the most impossible and beautiful dream that an orphan child had ever dreamed. The night before the game, Ethan wrote a letter that he planned to give to Steph Curry, if he had the opportunity. The letter simply said, "Dear Steph, my name is Ethan, and I don't have a father. Could you be my father? I promise I'll make you feel proud." He folded the letter carefully and put it in the pocket of the Warriors shirt that Sarah had bought especially for the game. It was a shirt a little too big, but Ethan wore it with the pride of someone wearing the most important armor of their life. What Ethan didn't know was that this simple letter, written with the devastating honesty of a child who grew up without family, was about to create one of the most touching moments in sports history, proving that some innocent questions have the power to break and rebuild hearts simultaneously. True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts, and on that game morning, Ethan's empty heart was about to give life to a miracle that no one would see coming. There exists a moment in life when the impossible and reality meet, creating a crack in time where miracles can happen. Have you ever witnessed the exact instant when a child decides to bet all their love on a single question? This is the story of how 5 words whispered by a 9-year-old boy silenced an entire arena. The Oracle Arena pulsed with the energy of 16,000 fans celebrating the Warriors' victory, 118-102, against the Lakers. The deafening sound of screams, applause, and music echoed through the stands like waves of collective euphoria. But for Ethan Williams, sitting in section 127 with David and Sarah, that noise was just the background music for the most important moment of his life. "That was the best game of my life," Ethan shouted to David, his eyes shining with a joy that came from a place much deeper than just sports entertainment. Throughout the entire game, Ethan had observed Steph Curry not just as a fan, but as a child studying in detail the man he secretly hoped would become his father. It was possible to perceive that every movement of Steph on the court was engraved in Ethan's memory like lessons about how heroes behave. "David," Ethan said, pulling the man's shirt sleeve with urgency, "do you think Steph Curry will give autographs today?" "Well, there's an autograph session scheduled for after the game. But it'll be a lot of people, son. It might be difficult to get close to him." The word son again echoed in the air, and Ethan felt that familiar mixture of gratitude and sadness that always came when someone called him that, temporarily. 20 minutes later, the 3 were in line for autographs, a human serpent of hundreds of people that extended through the arena corridor. Ethan held his folded letter in his pocket, the paper already a bit wrinkled from how much his nervous hands touched it. True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts. And at that moment, Ethan's heart was simultaneously empty of family and overflowing with hope. The line moved slowly, each step bringing Ethan closer to a moment he had mentally rehearsed 1,000 times. He observed the other children receiving autographs, seeing how Steph smiled gently to each one, how he crouched down to be at their height, how he treated each encounter with genuine care. "What if he says no?" Ethan whispered to Sarah, a sudden worry taking over his courage. "Dear," Sarah responded, kneeling to be at his height, "sometimes the most important questions are those that most frighten us to ask. But you know what I always say?" "What?" "Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is doing what your heart tells you, even when you're afraid." How is it possible that a 9-year-old child has to gather courage for something that should be a basic right? Having someone who loves them unconditionally. Ethan nodded, touching the letter in his pocket again, as if it were a protective talisman. 45 minutes later, only 5 people remained in front of Ethan. His heart beat so hard that he was sure everyone around could hear it. The palms of his hands were sweaty, and he wiped them repeatedly on the warrior's shirt he wore like armor. 3 people. 2 people. 1 person. And then it was his turn. Steph Curry was sitting behind a low table, looking even taller and more imposing in person than on television. But when his eyes met Ethan's, something magical happened. All that intimidating presence transformed into pure gentleness. "Hi, champion," Steph said, his genuine smile instantly warming Ethan's heart. "What's your name?" "Ethan Williams," the boy responded, his voice almost a whisper of nervousness and reverence. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ethan. Did you watch the game today?" "Yes, sir. It was the best game I've ever seen in my life." Steph took an official photo and began to autograph it, but something in Ethan's posture made him stop and pay more attention. There was an intensity in that child's gaze that went beyond typical fan enthusiasm. "Do you play basketball, Ethan?" "Yes, sir. I practice every day at the park near where I live. I'm trying to learn your three-point shot." "That's incredible. Keep practicing. You never know where basketball can take you." It was at this moment that Ethan knew he had to act. It was now or never. He breathed deeply, gathered all the courage his small heart could carry, and took the wrinkled letter from his pocket. "Mr. Curry," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly, "I wrote a letter for you, but I think it's better if I speak personally." Steph immediately noticed the change in the moment's energy. There was something in Ethan's sudden seriousness that made the arena's noise seem distant, as if the world had turned down its volume to listen to what that child had to say. "Of course, Ethan. What do you want to tell me?" It was impossible not to feel that this moment had been orchestrated by greater forces. All the arena's noise seemed to diminish. People around began to pay attention, and even the air seemed to get thicker with expectation. Ethan looked directly into Steph's eyes, gathered all the love and all the hope he had kept in his heart for 9 years, and asked the question that would change both their lives forever. "Can you be my father?" The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a void that seemed to suck all the energy from the arena. Steph felt as if someone had stopped time, as if those 5 words had created a bubble of reality where only he and Ethan existed. "I don't have a father," Ethan continued, his voice small but determined, the words flowing now that the floodgate had been opened. "My parents died when I was 6 years old, and since then I live with different families, but no one adopts me for real. And I watch you play always, and you seem like the kind of father I would like to have." People around began to approach, attracted by the emotional intensity of the moment. Cell phone cameras rose instinctively, but no one dared make noise. It was like witnessing something sacred. Steph felt his eyes fill with tears. In all his experiences as a professional athlete, in all the pressure moments, victories, and defeats, nothing had prepared him for the devastating purity of that question. "Ethan," Steph began, but his voice failed. "I promise I'll be a good son," Ethan continued, tears now flowing down his face, but his gaze firm and determined. "I'll study a lot. I'll help at home. And I'll practice basketball every day to make you proud of me." It was at this moment that something broke inside Steph Curry's chest. It didn't break from sadness, but broke in a way that allowed something much bigger to enter. An instant and protective love that he didn't know was possible to feel for a child he had met 5 minutes ago. True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts. And at that moment, Ethan's empty heart had found exactly the heart that was waiting to fill it. Steph stood up from the chair, walked around the table, and knelt in front of Ethan, getting exactly at the boy's eye level. When he spoke, his voice carried an emotion that echoed throughout the silent arena. "Ethan, you just asked the most courageous question I've ever heard in my life." And it was at this moment that the entire arena knew they were witnessing something that would change not just 2 lives, but touch millions of hearts around the world. There exists a moment in life when words become inadequate to express what the heart feels, and only tears can carry the weight of so much love. Have you ever witnessed the instant when a casual encounter transforms into fulfilled destiny? This was the moment when Steph Curry discovered that being a father has nothing to do with genetics, and everything to do with choice. Steph remained kneeling in front of Ethan, his brown eyes meeting the equally brown eyes of the boy, in a connection that transcended any logical explanation. It was possible to perceive that something profound was happening. Not just an encounter between fan and idol, but the mutual recognition of 2 souls that were destined to meet. "Ethan," Steph said, his voice broken with emotion, "do you know what you just did?" "Did I? Did I do something wrong?" Ethan asked, a hint of fear appearing in his voice, as if he feared having ruined the most important moment of his life. "No, champion. You did the most right thing that anyone has ever done in my presence." Around them, the arena had transformed into something completely different. People approached in concentric circles, but maintaining a respectful distance, as if they instinctively knew they were witnessing something sacred. Cell phones recorded, but in total silence. Even the children stopped talking. Steph looked at that little face that stared at him with a mixture of hope and terror, and felt something reorganize inside his chest. How is it possible that a man who had conquered everything in basketball discovered at that moment that his greatest victory was right there, in the form of a 9-year-old child asking to be loved? "Ethan, can I ask you a question?" "Yes, sir." "Why do you want me to be your father? You don't even really know me." The question made Ethan stop to think, his small eyes concentrating with the seriousness of someone trying to explain something very important. Because I watch you play, and you always help your teammates when they're sad. And when you miss, you don't get angry. You just try again. And you smile for real, not that fake smile that some adults make." Steph felt tears form in his eyes. "Continue. And because when you win, you always hug your family first, before the trophies. And I think that if you love your family so much, maybe you could have space to love one more person." It was impossible not to feel that this child had just given the purest definition of fatherhood that Steph had ever heard. It wasn't about obligation or biology. It was about capacity to love, to be present, to be the kind of person a child would admire. True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts, Steph whispered, unconsciously repeating the words that had echoed in Ethan's mind for so long. "What did you say, sir?" Ethan asked. "I said that you have the most courageous heart I've ever known." It was at this moment that Steph made a decision that would change not only his life, but completely redefine the concept of instant family. He stood up, took his phone, and did something that surprised even himself. "Isha," he said when his wife answered, his voice loaded with an emotional urgency she rarely heard. "I need you to come to the arena now. Right now." "Steph, what happened? Are you okay?" "I'm more than okay. I just met our son." The silence on the other side of the line was followed by a confused, "What?" "I'll explain when you get here. But Isha, trust me. Please, come now." While Steph spoke on the phone, Ethan observed with wide eyes, not completely understanding what was happening, but feeling that something extraordinary was unfolding before him. "Ethan," Steph said, putting away the phone and kneeling again, "can you wait here with me for a few minutes? There's someone very special I want you to meet." "Who?" "My wife. And if everything goes well, your new mother." The impact of those words echoed through the arena like emotional shock waves. Ethan felt his legs become weak, and Steph instinctively held him, pulling him into a hug that was photographed by dozens of people and would become one of the most touching images in sports history. "Are you serious, sir?" Ethan whispered against Steph's shoulder, his voice muffled by emotion. "More serious than I've ever been about anything in my life." It was at this moment that the arena exploded. Not in screams or applause, but in tears. Silent tears from hundreds of people who had just witnessed a miracle happen in real time. Grown adults cried without shame. Children asked their parents what was happening. Arena staff stopped their tasks to watch. David Rodriguez, who had watched everything from afar with Sarah, approached with tears flowing freely down his face. "Ethan," he said, his voice full of pride and happy sadness, "it looks like you found your real family." "You won't be angry with me?" Ethan asked, worried about the man who had cared for him temporarily. "Angry? Ethan, I'm proud of you. You had the courage to ask for exactly what your heart needed." Sarah joined the group, hugging Ethan as if she were handing over something precious. "We always knew you were too special to stay with us forever," she whispered. "You were just waiting for your true family to arrive." How is it possible that a moment of farewell can be simultaneously the saddest and the happiest? Ethan cried, not from sadness, but from a gratitude so deep it couldn't fit in words. 30 minutes later, Isha Curry arrived running at the arena, still confused about her husband's urgent phone call. When she saw Steph kneeling beside a 9-year-old child, both with tears in their eyes, surrounded by hundreds of emotional people, she instinctively knew that her life was about to change forever. Steph stood up, took Isha's hand, and led her to Ethan. "Isha, I want you to meet Ethan Williams." "Ethan, this is my wife, Isha." "Hi, Ethan," Isha said, kneeling to be at his height, her voice carrying the same natural gentleness that had attracted Steph years ago. "Hi, Mrs. Curry," Ethan responded, suddenly shy in front of the woman Steph had said could become his mother. "Ethan asked me a question today," Steph said to Isha, "and our answer will define the rest of our lives." "What question?" Ethan breathed deeply, gathered courage again, and looked directly into Isha's eyes. "I asked if you can be my parents, because I don't have family, and you seem to be the kind of parents I always dreamed of having." Isha felt the world stop. She looked at Steph, then at Ethan, then again at Steph. And at that moment, she understood why her husband had said he had found his son. "Ethan," she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes, "you just asked the most beautiful question I've ever heard in my life. Does that mean you want to adopt me?" Steph and Isha looked at each other, communicating in silence a decision that their hearts had already made, the moment they saw that courageous child asking for love. "It means," Steph said, his voice echoing through the silent arena, "that you just gained not only a father and a mother, but an entire family that will love you forever." The arena exploded again, this time in applause, shouts of joy and tears of happiness that echoed through every corner. It was impossible not to feel that this moment had transcended sport, fame, or anything else. It was pure humanity in its most beautiful form. True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts. And that night, Ethan's empty heart finally found the family that was waiting for him, while the Curry family's heart expanded to include more love than they ever imagined possible. What none of them knew yet was that this moment was being broadcast live and would become viral in a matter of hours, touching millions of hearts and redefining forever the concept of family chosen by love. Have you ever witnessed how a single moment of courage can create waves that transform not just individual lives, but the entire world? How a question asked out of love can redefine the meaning of family for millions of people. This is the story of how 5 words whispered by a 9-year-old orphan became the most powerful example that family is not about blood. It's about choice. 6 months had passed since that magical night at the Oracle Arena, and the Curry House in Atherton breathed a completely new energy. It was possible to perceive that something fundamental had changed not just in the physical structure of the house, with the new room decorated especially for Ethan, but in the very soul of the family. Ethan Williams Curry, now officially adopted, was sitting at the breakfast table wearing his favorite Warriors shirt, helping Riley and Ryan with their math homework before school. The transformation wasn't just in the surname he now carried with pride, but in the confidence that radiated from every movement, every smile, every "Good morning, Dad," he said to Steph. "Dad," Ethan said, using the word he had dreamed of speaking for 3 years. "Did you see that my story is being studied at Riley's school?" Steph smiled, still getting emotional every time he heard "Dad" coming from Ethan's lips. "Really? What are they studying?" "The teacher said that our family is an example of how love can happen in unexpected ways, and that my question that night taught many people about courage. How is it possible that a 9-year-old child inadvertently became a teacher about courage and love for the entire world?" Ethan's story had become viral in proportions that surprised even Steph. The video of the moment at the arena had been watched more than 200 million times in 6 months, translated into dozens of languages, and inspired adoption movements around the planet. Isha appeared in the kitchen, kissing Steph and ruffling Ethan's hair with the naturalness of someone who had always been his mother. "You know that today is the special day, right, my love?" she said to Ethan. "The documentary day," Ethan responded, his eyes shining with excitement. That night, Netflix would premiere One Question, One Family, a documentary about Ethan's journey from the adoption system to officially becoming a Curry. But more than that, the documentary explored how that moment had inspired more than 10,000 adoptions worldwide. "True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts," Steph had said during one of the documentary interviews, and Ethan's empty heart not only found a family, it taught the world that family is a choice we make with love. not an obligation we're born with. Ethan's transformation was visible in every aspect of his life. At school, he had become a natural advocate for other children in adoption situations, creating a club called Empty Hearts, Full Futures, where orphaned children, or those in temporary families, met to share stories and support each other. You know what impresses me most about Ethan? Jessica Walsh, his teacher, had said during an interview for the documentary. It's not just that he found his family. It's that he's helping other children believe that they can find theirs too. But the transformation hadn't happened just with Ethan. Steph and Isha discovered that adopting an older child had completely changed their perspective on parenthood, family, and purpose. Before Ethan, I thought family was about creating bonds from birth, Isha had reflected in an interview. Ethan taught me that family is about choosing to love someone unconditionally, regardless of when they arrive in your life. Steph, in turn, had found a purpose that transcended basketball. He created the Courageous Question Foundation, dedicated to facilitating adoptions and supporting orphaned children throughout the country. That question from Ethan changed my life more than any championship, I said during the foundation's launch. It taught me that the most important victory doesn't happen on courts. It happens when we open our hearts to love without limits. It was impossible not to feel that this story had created something much bigger than a happy family. It had become a global movement about courage, love, and the redefinition of family. 1 year after the adoption, Steph received a letter that made him cry. It was from an 8-year-old girl in France who had seen Ethan's video and decided to ask the same question to a couple that visited her at the orphanage regularly. The letter said, "Monsieur Curry, thank you for teaching Ethan to be courageous. Because of him, I also had courage to ask, and now I have a maman and a papa who love me very much." How many times in life does a single action create waves that reach entire continents? Steph's foundation had received more than 50,000 similar letters. Children around the world who had found courage in Ethan's story to ask their own courageous questions. "What did you learn about courage this year?" a journalist asked Ethan during a special interview on the first anniversary of his adoption. "I learned that courage isn't not being afraid," Ethan responded with the wisdom of someone who had lived more emotion in 9 years than many people live in an entire lifetime. Courage is asking the question that your heart most needs to ask, even when you don't know what the answer will be. During the ETV documentary premiere, Ethan was sitting between Steph and Isha in the theater, watching his own journey being told on the big screen. When the moment of the fateful question arrived, "Can you be my father?" he felt Steph squeeze his hand. "I still think it was the smartest question I ever asked in my life," Ethan whispered. "And I still think it was the most beautiful question I ever received," Steph whispered back. After the screening, Ethan was invited to speak on stage. In front of an demi-fille audience of 500 people, including many adoptive families and orphaned children, he said something that would become one of the most shared quotes about adoption. "I used to think that being an orphan meant that nobody wanted me. But now I know it meant that my family was looking for me, and I was looking for them. Sometimes the right people arrive at the right time, but in ways we never imagined." David and Sarah Rodriguez, who were in the audience, cried with pride. They had become part of the Curry extended family, proving that true love creates connections that last forever. "True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts," David had said during his interview for the documentary. And having the privilege of caring for Ethan until he found his permanent family was one of the greatest gifts of our lives. 2 years after the adoption, Ethan was playing in the Curry house backyard with Riley and Ryan when a journalist asked how he felt about having become a global inspiration. "I didn't want to be famous," he responded with the simple honesty that characterized him. "I just wanted a family. But if my story helps other children find their families, then I'm happy that it's known." The story's impact continued growing. Schools around the world began teaching about Ethan's question as an example of courage and vulnerability. Adoption centers reported significant increases in families interested in adopting older children. Therapists used the story to teach children about how to express their emotional needs. How is it possible that a question asked in a moment of desperation becomes a beacon of hope for millions? The answer lay in the purity of Ethan's intention and the genuine generosity of Steph and Isha's response. 5 years later, Ethan, now 14 years old and already taller than Isha, continued being the same generous and courageous boy, but with a confidence that came from knowing he was loved unconditionally. "Dad," he said to Steph, during a basketball game in the backyard, "do you regret having said yes that night?" Steph stopped dribbling and looked at the son who had chosen him as much as he had chosen Ethan. "Ethan, that was the easiest decision I ever made in my life. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because when someone has enough courage to ask to be loved, the only possible answer is to say yes and love with everything you have." It was impossible not to feel that this story had created an eternal legacy, not just for the Curry family, but for humanity. It had proven that family is a choice, that courage can come in small packages, and that sometimes the most frightening questions are exactly those we need to ask. True dreams are born in the emptiest hearts. Ethan had written in his diary that night, 5 years after the question that changed everything. "But when we find our family, we discover that our hearts were much bigger than we imagined. They had space not just to be loved, but to love back with all our strength." And so, a question whispered by a 9-year-old orphan transformed into the most powerful lesson the modern world had received about family, courage, and unconditional love. Because, in the end, true dreams are born in the emptiest hearts. But when these dreams become reality, they fill not just one heart, they transform the entire world, one family at a time.